Could a potential confrontation between the United States and Iran, along with the risk of a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, really be a bold strategic move to contain China? Let's look at the data. During the recent period of tension between the US and Iran, as many as 97% of Iranian oil tankers went directly to China. So if you want to weaken an industrial superpower without directly invading it, what is the most effective way? The answer is to cut off its oil supply. The United States realized that China depends heavily on oil from countries like Venezuela and Iran. From that point, the strategy is envisioned like this. First, if the US removes Nicolas Maduro from power, the flow of Venezuelan oil to China would be cut off. The second target is Iran, which supplies a very large share of China's remaining oil. What is especially notable is that when Iran once tried to impose a blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump responded by setting up a counter-blockade against that very blockade. Then something very striking happened. Hundreds of oil tankers began turning to the United States to buy oil indirectly. That drove up US petrodollar profits and brought major additional revenue into the country. Why would the United States ever want the world's most important oil choke point to be shut down? According to this argument, the answer is simple. Total energy dominance, a geopolitical chess move under Trump. Now imagine a scenario where tensions escalate and the strait is blockaded. Instantly, 20% of the world's oil supply is trapped. In that scenario, there are currently 121 supertankers backed up outside the Persian Gulf. They are empty. Their contracts have been canceled, and buyers in Europe and Asia are panicking. When these multi-million-dollar ships are desperate because the Middle Eastern oil tap has run dry, where do they go? They turn west, toward the only players still capable of keeping the engines of the world running: the United States.
Over the past decade, America has quietly transformed itself into an energy superpower. It has the reserves, the extraction technology, and the export terminal system. When Hormuz closes, U.S. crude is no longer just an option. It becomes the most sought-after commodity on Earth. Prices surge, and billions of dollars flow directly into the American economy. So what about Venezuela? What role does a heavily sanctioned country like Venezuela play in Washington's larger plan? According to this line of thinking, the United States holds the sanctions dial in its hand. By selectively easing restrictions on Venezuelan heavy crude, the U.S. can direct the flow of South American oil into global markets. It manages the oil price shock just enough to keep allies from collapsing, while also pulling Venezuela away from Eastern influence and forcing it to play by American rules. This is an extremely ruthless, high-risk gamble. By allowing the Middle East to lock itself down, the U.S. flips the entire global energy map. Those 121 tankers are not just buying oil, they are also buying American strategic leverage. At that point, the story is no longer about keeping peace in the desert. It is about proving that when the old order breaks down, the house always wins. What exactly is a blockade, and what did Trump do? Imagine it like putting a bouncer at the door. Trump sent the U.S. Navy to the Strait of Hormuz and declared that any ship leaving an Iranian port would not be allowed through. Any ship that paid Iran a toll to pass would also be stopped. There were even warnings that any Iranian ship moving too close to the blockade zone could be eliminated immediately. This is a very serious matter. So serious that many experts called it an act of war. But how does the United States know which ships came from Iran when ships are enormous and there are thousands of them? This is where technology enters the picture. They use maritime AI, meaning artificial intelligence platforms designed to track every ship through satellites and radar, even when a vessel turns off its GPS. AI does not just count ships, it reads behavior. It cross-checks satellite imagery, automatic identification system signals, voyage history, port call records, flag registrations, cargo manifests, and even corporate ownership networks. From there, it assigns each vessel a real-time risk profile. As soon as the blockade begins, the platform has already flagged that Iran's oil exports remain structurally active, with about 157.7 million barrels at sea and 97.6% of them headed toward China. That figure, 97.6% going to China, may be the most important data point in this entire conflict. It is the number that explains almost everything. In other words, AI is not just watching the sea in general. It is watching an entire hidden floating pipeline carrying sanctioned oil from Iranian ports to Chinese refineries. So, in operational terms, the Strait of Hormuz blockade targets ships leaving Iranian ports. But in functional terms, it is a direct strike on China's cheap oil supply chain. So is choking China the main objective behind these global moves? Not entirely, but it may be the biggest strategic consequence. In geopolitics, actions rarely have only one motive. For the U.S. administration, the immediate goals are described very clearly: permanently destroy Iran's nuclear ambitions and assert dominance in the Western Hemisphere by removing Maduro. But how would this strategy devastate Beijing's economy? The core of it lies in a massive price shock and the loss of a critical energy buffer. China's massive economy runs on cheap energy. But with the Middle East sinking into conflict and the Strait of Hormuz tightened, global crude benchmarks have already jumped above $130 to $140 a barrel. At that point, China's supply pipeline is almost stripped of its cheapest sources. Cutting off Venezuela in January and bottlenecking Iran in April effectively means the United States has backed Beijing into a corner. Instead of relying on discounted sanctioned oil, China is forced to buy energy on the open market at extremely inflated wartime prices. Does China still have any backup option left? According to this argument, there is almost only one left, but the political cost is enormous. The only major remaining discounted oil source for China is Russia. And while that may keep things running, such near-total dependence gives Moscow a level of leverage that Beijing cannot be comfortable with. But how would the United States actually seize or block a foreign-flagged oil tanker? And how would it enforce a blockade when a geopolitical chess game suddenly turns into a real military operation? In this scenario, the U.S. would impose a strict blockade on Iranian oil, the very oil China has openly placed under its protection. This would be the climax of weeks of razor-tight standoff, triggered by Washington's brand new full blockade policy against Iranian exports. The target could be a rusting 10-year-old oil tanker identified by U.S. intelligence as part of the Shadow Fleet, a secret network of ships used by China and Iran to transport illicit oil and evade global sanctions. Picture the situation. An oil tanker is intercepted by the U.S. Navy near the Strait of Hormuz. When the captain refuses to stop, shuts off the transponder and flees into the Pacific Ocean, the United States launches a pursuit, setting off a brutal chase stretching more than 5,000 miles. If you were looking to upgrade your digital defense system, check out this military-grade VPN. Think of Surfshark VPN as your frontline defense. It scans, detects threats, and warns you about thousands of dangerous emails. On top of that, it includes powerful antivirus software to protect your devices from viruses, malware, and tracking by ads, bots, or third parties. Finally, with Surfshark VPN, a single subscription can protect not just you, but also your friends, or even your whole city if you wanted. Visit the link, surf.com/itel. When you buy through the promo link, you get 4 extra months free, along with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Back to the scenario at sea. What deceptive tactics would the crew use? If this is an Iranian oil tanker, the crew may frantically try to change the ship's legal identity while underway to make it harder to touch. They may repaint the hull, rename the ship with a Chinese or Russian-sounding name, and raise the corresponding flag. As the ship races toward the strategic gap between the Middle East and the Indian Ocean, the situation becomes even more complicated because Chinese warships operating nearby would form a defensive screen. That would force American commanders to proceed with extreme caution, because even one small mistake could trigger an unintended naval war. Even with the silent threat lurking below the surface, the United States could still greenlight the seizure of the tanker. Their strategy would be extremely bold. Neutralize the Chinese submarine not with torpedoes, but with overwhelming air superiority. Leading the chase on the surface would be the USCGC Monroe, a Legend-class cutter that has tracked the Iran-China vessel for weeks through violent, heavy seas. But before the U.S. Navy can make its move, the sky has to be secured. U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft would blanket the area, dropping a network of sonar buoys to track every movement of the Chinese submarine, while KC-135 Stratotankers keep the surveillance system running 24/7. The U.S. Air Force would also join in, deploying electronic warfare assets to expose all Chinese communications. In effect, the P-8s would box in the submarine, sending a clear signal that any hostile action would bring an immediate and devastating response. Once the underwater threat has been pinned down, American surface ships would move in. Because the seas are too rough for small boats to launch a safe boarding operation, U.S. forces would choose a direct vertical approach. In a precise assault, special operations teams would fast rope from hovering helicopters straight onto the tanker's deck. Within minutes, they would secure the bridge, cut the engines, and raise the American flag. From that moment on, the oil tanker would be theirs, and the blockade would be enforced.